Hey guys, tonight we step into the cool embrace of the Alps. Not the touristy ski resorts or the postcard-perfect chalets, but the forgotten villages tucked high in these mountains where time moves differently, if it moves at all. Right now you're standing on a weathered platform as the last evening train clatters away behind you, leaving only silence and the faint smell of coal dust. The air is crisp enough to bite, laced with wood smoke and pine, and you can already feel that sleepy weight settle on your eyelids. You're about to climb into a world of stone paths, ghost stories, impossible farms, and bells that never stop ringing. And you probably won't survive this if you forgot to pack snacks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know down in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm always curious. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hoist your little backpack. It feels heavier than it should, doesn't it? And begin walking away from the station into a faintly glowing dusk. The town you're leaving behind is already shutting down for the night. Shutters clatter shut on weather-beaten windows, and cats skulk along cobbled alleys. Above you, the mountains rear up into shadowy giants, their peaks dusted white like forgotten powdered sugar. The first thing you notice is how quiet it is here. The only sound comes from your boots on gravel and the distant rush of a river somewhere down below. That, and the occasional clang of a distant cowbell, though, unsettlingly, there don't seem to be any cows in sight. On the edge of the town is a faded wooden sign painted in a language you don't recognize. You pause to squint at it, tracing the letters with your finger. Historians still argue whether this local script derives from medieval Latin scribes who settled here or if it's something far older, a remnant of pre-Roman tribes who once called these heights home. Either way, you can't read it, so you move on. The path quickly tilts upward. The stones underfoot are slick and worn smooth, evidence of centuries of climbers, shepherds, and maybe one or two people who, like you, just felt compelled to see what was up there. Every so often you pass one of those strange waymarkers, carved into the shape of an open hand, palm up, or a spiral, or a bird with its wings folded, each one faintly luminous in the fading light. According to local folklore, they're meant to guide you on the correct path, and if you start seeing them backwards, it means you've gone too far. So far, so good. Half an hour in, your breath clouds the air like steam, and your thighs are starting to burn. You keep glancing back over your shoulder. Below you, the lights of the town have shrunk to pinpricks, and the railway line is just a black thread winding into the distance. Above you is nothing but the suggestion of peaks cutting into a star-pricked sky. You stop at a bend in the trail where a lonely wooden bench sits, its back carved with yet another mysterious inscription, and its seat so warped it's more sculpture than furniture. You sit anyway. From here you can see the river more clearly now, far below, glinting silver under the rising moon. And there, across the valley, you can just make out little clutches of light higher up on the mountainside. Those are your villages. They don't seem to belong to this century, or maybe even the last. A breeze lifts and carries with it a faint smell of wood smoke and something faintly sweet honey. And for a moment you feel as though you're being watched, maybe by one of the elusive mountain lynxes that still stalk these forests, or maybe by the ghosts the locals swear roam these slopes on moonlit nights. Quirky little detail. In the 1600s, villagers reportedly left bowls of milk outside for the cold ones, spirits said to keep the paths safe in exchange for offerings. You check your pack, no milk. Well, hopefully they accept granola bars these days. Further along, the trail gets narrower and the stones more irregular. You find yourself ducking under a fallen pine bough and then squeezing between two slabs of granite that have somehow leaned together over the centuries like old friends. The temperature drops noticeably here, and your breath puffs thicker and whiter. Around the next bend, you encounter a tiny shrine nestled into the rock face, just a niche holding a figure carved from dark wood, its features worn away, but with a crown of delicate flowers clearly fresh. Someone was here recently. You take a closer look and realize the figure is holding a tiny bundle in its arms, perhaps meant to represent a child, though no one seems to agree. Some say it's a fertility goddess, others insist it's a forgotten saint. You notice more of those hand-shaped waymarkers now, glowing faintly in the moonlight like they're alive, though you'd swear they weren't quite in these spots when you passed earlier. It's probably fine. Finally, you crest a small rise and find yourself standing at the foot of a long, uneven staircase carved directly into the rock. Above, at the top of the stairs, you can just make out the faint outline of the first real village, slate roofs glinting faintly, chimneys breathing smoke, and a line of faint yellow windows winking at you like sleepy eyes. You take one last long breath, letting the thin, pine-scented air fill your lungs and start to climb the steps. You can almost hear a faint chorus of bells and murmurs from above, as though the stones themselves are whispering to you. Welcome back. You ease your way up those uneven stone steps, each one a different size, a little slick with moss, a little colder than you expected. The climb is surprisingly long enough for your legs to start feeling like cooked noodles and your breath to come in soft clouds you could almost knit into a scarf. Halfway up you pause, resting your palm against the cool rock wall and glance back. The railway station is now a faint memory of light far below, and even the town you left seems to have disappeared into shadow. At the top of the steps, the path straightens into what looks at first like a simple trail, but as you take your first careful steps forward, you notice it's actually a centuries-old stone path. Polished by countless feet before yours, the stones shine faintly, moonlight catching in their dips and edges. It winds away into the dark like a lazy silver snake, flanked on either side by low, dry stone walls that seem to lean toward you. You imagine the people who built this path, hauling each of these heavy slabs on their backs, probably arguing the whole way about which stones fit where. Historians still argue whether these mountain roads were originally Roman military routes later adopted by villagers, or if they predate even that, may be laid down by pre-Christian tribes to connect sacred sites. You run your fingers along the walls as you walk, feeling the cool lichen crust and little tufts of wild thyme that have pushed through. You catch its smell, faint but soothing, and for a second you're tempted to pluck a sprig and tuck it into your pocket like some medieval herbalist. Here and there, the stones in the path bear odd etchings, spirals, crosses, suns, some so worn they almost disappear under your boots. Local legend claims these were made to confuse the devil. He could only follow a straight road, and this winding path full of symbols would leave him dizzy and frustrated. Quirky, sure, but it makes you glance back anyway, just to check you're still alone. Around a bend, you find the first of the waymarkers tonight, not the glowing hand shapes from earlier, but taller, weathered stone pillars topped with small wooden birds, their wings outstretched as though frozen mid-flight. A faint creaking sound comes from one of them, and you realize the bird is gently rocking in the breeze. Further along the path, a little alcove in the wall holds a tiny stone trough filled with water. It's clear and cold, fed by a hidden spring. Someone has left a single copper coin at the bottom. You crouch and dip your fingers into it. The chill bites like snowmelt, and you can feel the prickle of it all the way up to your elbow. The water tastes faintly of minerals, and you can't help but wonder how many hundreds of years people have paused here for a drink. Some say the spring is blessed, others say cursed, and historians still can't decide if it was originally a Roman roadside shrine or a pagan ritual site. Either way, you're hydrated now. Onward you go, passing under a rustic wooden arch strung with drying herbs. The scent is strong rosemary, sage, maybe lavender, mingling with the smell of cold stone and distant wood smoke. You notice the herbs are tied in little bundles with bright red string, swaying faintly in the wind. For a while the path flattens out and walking becomes easier. On either side you see abandoned terraces, low walls of stone stepping up the mountainside, now choked with wildflowers and scrub. Once these terraces were vineyards, painstakingly tended, producing wine so strong that according to one local story, A single glass could floor a grown man. No vineyards remain now, just scattered vines clinging stubbornly to the rocks. A soft sound reaches your ears, a faint humming. You stop listening. It's not the wind, not the river far below. You can't place it. But as you walk, it seems to follow you, coming and going like a half-forgotten tune. You round another bend, and there it is, the first real glimpse of the village ahead. The path splits into two narrow lanes, each lined with squat stone houses huddled together as if to keep warm. Their walls are patched with plaster, their roofs heavy with dark slate tiles that glint like fish scales in the moonlight. Some windows glow faintly with candlelight or low electric bulbs, though the wiring here is notoriously unreliable. You can even hear the faint creak of a shutter swinging in the breeze. One balcony overhead is hung with drying flowers and ropes of garlic, which sway and clatter softly like tiny bells. You pick the left lane and walk slowly, taking it all in. Each house seems to have its own personality: carved doors, painted lintels, tiny iron knockers in the shape of wolves' heads or suns. One even has a carved date over the door, 1627. Another has no date at all but features an intricate geometric pattern that looks oddly modern. Historians still argue whether these geometric designs were just aesthetic or encoded symbols of some long-forgotten guild or family. A small dog appears out of nowhere, a shaggy black thing that regards you solemnly before trotting ahead, as if to show you the way. You're tempted to ask it its name but decide against it. You've heard stories about dogs here that don't always stay dogs. At the end of the lane, you find yourself in a tiny square, more of a widened crossroads, really. At its center is an ancient well covered by a wooden roof and decorated with faded frescoes depicting shepherds and goats, though the paint has flaked away until their faces are just suggestion and shadow. On one side of the square is a narrow shop, dark wood signs swinging gently overhead, and in its window sits an assortment of strange, lumpy cheeses and a jar of pickled, something that you're not sure even counts as food. You pause in the square for a moment, feeling the stone under your boots, the faint breeze on your cheek, the quiet press of the mountains all around. And then you catch movement in one of the upper windows, just a curtain twitching closed, but enough to remind you that you're not quite alone here. You glance at the dog, who gives you a look that could either be encouragement or warning. Either way, the path continues, winding deeper into the village, and you follow. You follow the path as it leaves the little square, narrower now, with houses on one side and a sheer drop on the other where the mountain suddenly gives way to a deep, dark ravine. You can just hear water roaring faintly at the bottom, though it's invisible in the moonlight. A shaky wooden railing runs along the edge, though honestly, it looks more decorative than reliable. As you walk, the buildings thin out and the trees begin to close in. Tall pines and firs lean over the path, their branches heavy with dark needles that seem to swallow the starlight. You notice how quiet it's become again. Even the dog has disappeared somewhere behind you, leaving only your own footsteps and that odd sense of being watched. Soon you're properly inside the forest, what the locals call Der Flüsterwald, the Whispering Forest. Supposedly, it's named because of how the wind moves through the trees here, making strange sighing and murmuring sounds. Though as you stand still and listen, it feels like more than just wind. You can almost make out words, soft, breathy, indistinct, but nothing you can understand. You continue forward anyway because that's what you do. The path underfoot is softer now, earth and needles instead of stone, and it smells incredible, resin and cold soil and faintly of mushrooms. One tree you pass has a thick trunk that splits into three about waist high, with what looks like little bundles of sticks wedged into its crevices. You crouch to examine them. Each bundle is tied with colorful thread and contains, weirdly enough, a single bird feather, a few dried herbs, and a stone. According to local tradition, these are Wedgegeister or way spirits, charms meant to protect travelers in the forest. You're not sure if they're protecting you from the forest or the forest from you. A few minutes later, You come upon a low stone wall running through the woods, completely overgrown with moss. You follow it for a while until you reach what might have once been a gate, two pillars topped with carved owls. The owls' eyes catch the moonlight and seem to glow faintly as you pass through. On the other side, the trees grow even closer, trunks gnarled and twisted, their roots sprawling across the path. You have to watch your step carefully now. You notice something carved into one of the larger roots, a spiral, almost identical to the ones you saw on the stones earlier. Historians still argue whether these spiral markings are mere decoration, or a kind of ancient map, or some forgotten language of the forest itself. You stop to rest on a fallen log and notice how the air here feels heavier, colder somehow, and quieter. You listen for the murmurs again, and now you're almost certain you can pick out something like your name, which is comforting. Maybe. You chuckle softly to yourself because clearly the forest is just playing tricks on you now. Further on, you come to a tiny clearing where the moonlight actually reaches the ground. In the center is a tall standing stone, smooth and dark with faint white markings. Someone's placed fresh flowers at its base, small alpine blooms that don't even grow at this altitude, as far as you know. You lay your hand on the stone and feel how warm it is compared to the cold air around you. People say the stone marks the resting place of an ancient guide who led lost travelers through the woods, though others believe it's the entrance to something deeper, something no one's supposed to find. You press on, noting the strange way the trees seem to shift around you. The path that was clear only moments ago now forks without warning, and one of the hand-shaped waymarkers stands at the junction, its fingers pointing down both paths at once. That seems like cheating. You choose the left fork, mostly because it smells faintly of smoke down that way, and the thought of warmth is appealing right about now. As you walk, you pass through a narrow gap in the rocks where tree roots form a kind of arch overhead. Someone has strung tiny bells along the roots, and they tinkle softly as you brush past them, sending shivers down your spine. After what feels like hours, though your watch, which now seems to tick louder than usual, claims it's only been 15 minutes, you emerge from the trees into another clearing. Here, the ground is littered with pine cones and ancient, splintering wooden figures planted into the earth. Each figure is roughly human-shaped but faceless, with arms raised as though in mid-prayer or mid-warning. Quirky fact: in the 19th century, local children used to play hide and seek among these figures and swear they moved when no one was looking. You take care not to touch any of them. At the far edge of the clearing, a faint light glows between the trees. You follow it, and the forest finally begins to thin out. The path becomes stonier again, and you hear water trickling nearby, though this time it's no raging river but a gentle stream, burbling happily to itself. You cross a tiny bridge of 2 planks and find yourself standing on the outskirts of another hamlet, smaller than the first but clearly alive. Smoke curls from chimneys. Dim light spills through wooden shutters. A soft melody drifts toward you, the sound of some string instrument, though it's not any tune you recognize. And there, just ahead, a narrow trail disappears behind another row of houses and seems to dive even deeper into the mountains. The air smells of burning pine and something faintly sweet again, maybe honey, maybe something stranger. For a moment, you stand there and glance back at the whispering forest behind you, which now seems impossibly dark and still. And just for a second, you catch the faintest sound of laughter, high, soft, and gone almost before you register it. You shake your head, adjust your pack, and step forward, deeper into the folds of the mountains. You walk slowly now, the stones underfoot clicking in a steady rhythm, a little uneven but oddly soothing, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Ahead, the path weaves between squat stone houses perched precariously on terraces of rock. You can tell this village is older than the last. Everything about it feels more intentional. The way the walls lean into each other for support, the roofs layered with thick slabs of slate to withstand centuries of snow. And then you notice the balconies. At first glance, They're just charming wooden balconies jutting out from each house, hung with flower boxes and thick ropes of drying herbs. But as you peer closer, you realize each one is elaborately carved, not just pretty swirls and leaves, but tiny, painstaking scenes. One balcony shows a man wrestling what looks like a bear, while another carves what you're almost certain is a dragon coiled around a tree. Another features an entire wedding procession, complete with musicians and dancers frozen mid-step. And one, just one, depicts what might be a spaceship, or a very enthusiastic star. Historians still argue whether these more unusual carvings are symbolic, whimsical, or a record of visitors from elsewhere. You pause in front of one house where the balcony tells a story in 3 panels. First, a hunter setting out, then a figure kneeling before a shrine, and finally, most unsettling, a figure lying in the snow with a halo of birds above. You reach out and trace the carving lightly with your finger, feeling how deep the grooves go, how much care someone poured into it hundreds of years ago. Further along the lane, you notice little wooden beams sticking out at odd angles beneath some balconies. They're carved, too, but these are more functional, usually depicting fierce faces or animals believed to ward off evil. One snarling fox juts out directly over your head, its wooden eyes sharp even in the soft glow of moonlight. A faint clatter makes you glance up. On one balcony, a woman sits quietly in the shadows, weaving something into her hair. She looks down at you, neither smiling nor frowning, just watching. Then she disappears into the house, the faint creak of the door echoing behind her. You walk on. Around the next corner, the path widens slightly into another tiny square, where a wooden bench and a crooked fountain wait under the watchful eye of yet another house with an extraordinary balcony. This one is covered in carved birds of all kinds: owls, swans, sparrows, their wings spread, beaks open as if frozen mid-song. A gust of wind makes the herbs and flowers hanging above the fountain rustle and dance, and for a second you swear you hear faint laughter again, though it's probably just the wind catching in the woodwork. Probably. On the far side of the square, you come to what looks like a workshop. The door stands open, a crack, warm golden light spilling out. You peek inside and see an elderly man sitting at a workbench, chisel in hand, carefully etching another balcony piece. You notice his hands are gnarled but precise, his movements slow and deliberate. Without looking up, he mutters something in a dialect you can't quite catch and gestures at the wall behind him. There hangs a row of small, carved plaques depicting all the different balconies of the village, each marked with a tiny number. You realize he's not just crafting them, he's cataloging them, preserving their stories in wood for someone someday to understand. You murmur a polite thank you, even though you're not sure he heard you, and quietly back out into the cool night. Continuing up the street, you pass under a massive wooden beam connecting 2 houses overhead, where more carvings dance in the shadows. One beam shows a parade of strange creatures you can't quite name, some vaguely human, others definitely not, all interwoven in a seamless line. Quirky fact: the villagers have a tradition of adding a new carving to these beams every generation, and no 2 carvings are allowed to repeat, which explains the odd one you pass next, a grinning cat wearing boots, tucked between more traditional goats and saints. Higher still, the village starts to thin again. The house is more scattered now, balconies jutting out like watchful sentinels. Some of them are so old the wood has darkened to almost black, the details barely visible unless you're looking closely. You stop under one of these and find yourself tilting your head to follow the story, a procession of villagers carrying what appears to be a large fish through the streets. Historians still argue whether this carving commemorates an annual festival or a particularly memorable fishing expedition. Either way, you can't help but smile at the idea of an entire village celebrating a single fish. The path bends again, and suddenly you find yourself at a kind of overlook. Below, you see the valley spread out, the faint ribbon of river, the flickering lights of other hidden villages clinging to the mountainside. Above, the stars blaze colder and clearer now, with the Milky Way draped like a luminous scarf across the heavens. And then from somewhere far below, or maybe from behind you, you hear the faint sound of bells again. Slow, deliberate as though marking time, though there's no clock in sight. You glance up at the nearest balcony, this one depicting a crescent moon cradling a sleeping figure, and you could almost swear that figure is breathing. With the faintest grin, you turn back to the path, letting your hand trail along the rough stone wall beside you, and keep walking toward the next cluster of homes, their balconies waiting, whispering their stories into the night air. You leave the balconies behind, though you can still feel their eyes, wooden or not, on your back as you climb higher. The path becomes steeper now, zigzagging up through a tangle of low stone walls and switchbacks. You stop at one corner to catch your breath, resting your hands on your knees, and that's when you really see them, the impossible terrace farms. They rise above you like a staircase built by gods with more time than sense, narrow ledges of soil and stone somehow clinging to the mountain. Even in the moonlight, you can see that they're alive, rows of crops growing in neat, if improbable, lines, though you can't quite tell what they are at this hour. You step closer and touch the edge of the nearest wall, which is only as tall as your waist but so thick you couldn't wrap your arms around it. The stones are stacked without mortar, just perfectly balanced on one another, some bearing those same faint spiral carvings you keep spotting. Historians still argue whether these terraces were the work of medieval monks experimenting with extreme agriculture, or whether they predate organized farming altogether, a feat of ancient engineering that no one fully understands. The wind carries a faint scent here, earthy and sweet, mixed with a hint of smoke. You climb onto the first terrace, feeling the springy soil give a little under your boots, and notice the plants seem different. Some terraces have grapevines knotted and gnarled like old men's hands. Others appear to grow wheat or barley, though shorter and more golden than you're used to. And still others are filled with strange dark leaves that glisten faintly, almost metallic, under the moonlight. According to local stories, those dark-leaved plants are called nachgrün, night greens, and can be brewed into a tea that either cures insomnia or ensures you never wake up. Depends who you ask. You run your fingers along a vine and feel the cool dampness of dew collecting there. A little further on, you find a tiny shed nestled into one terrace wall, its door hanging open. Inside are hand tools so old they look more like museum pieces than farm equipment. Wooden rakes, curved scythes, wicker baskets lined with what might be sheepskin. Leaning against the doorway, you watch the faint silver of clouds drift over the moon and catch the quiet murmur of water somewhere. Irrigation channels, perhaps. The locals insist they don't use modern pipes or pumps here, yet the terraces stay lush even through dry summers. Some believe the stones themselves drink moisture from the air and release it slowly, feeding the soil beneath. Quirky, sure, but standing here surrounded by thriving plants on a vertical rock face, you start to believe anything's possible. You continue upward, zigzagging from terrace to terrace, occasionally spotting a wooden ladder lashed together and leaning against the walls. One terrace holds a single, massive oak tree growing right out of the center, its roots weaving through the stones like veins. Tiny bells dangle from its branches, chiming softly when the breeze catches them. When you pause to rest again, you sit on a low wall and look out over the valley below. The villages you passed earlier are now scattered constellations of faint light. Above, the stars have shifted slightly, the Big Dipper hanging lower over the peaks. You hear the faint rattle of pebbles nearby and turn just in time to see a shadow dart between two rows of vines. Too big for a rabbit, too graceful for a goat. You decide not to pursue it. On the next terrace up, you find a little alcove with a stone bench and a basket of harvested greens waiting as though for you. You pluck a leaf, one of the dark, shiny ones, and hold it to your nose. It smells faintly of mint, but heavier, more bitter. You're tempted to take a bite but think better of it, remembering the whole never wake up story. You notice now that many of the walls have niches built into them at irregular intervals, each holding a small offering, a coil of bread, a sprig of rosemary, a tiny candle burned down to a stub. The locals say these offerings keep the terraces awake, ensuring the earth keeps giving. Whether you believe that or not, the place does feel alive somehow, as though it's watching you just as closely as you're watching it. Climbing higher still, you come to a particularly narrow terrace where the path is barely wider than your boots. Here the stone walls rise above your head on both sides, making you feel like you're walking through a green canyon. You hear another faint hum, low, rhythmic, almost like chanting, but when you stop to listen, it fades into silence. You glance at the wall to your right and notice a set of tiny handprints pressed into the stone. They're small, child-sized, and surprisingly deep, as if someone pressed into clay and it hardened that way centuries ago. Historians still debate whether these marks were ceremonial, accidental, or evidence of some forgotten ritual involving children and harvest blessings. You lay your own hand over one of the prints and feel the chill of the stone seep into your skin. At last, you reach the topmost terrace, or so it seems. This one is broader than the rest, with a flat, open space where several small stone huts stand in a circle. Smoke curls lazily from the roof of one, and you can just make out the faint golden glow of firelight flickering through a crack in the door. In the center of this highest terrace sits an enormous, flat stone, roughly circular, pocked with tiny hollows and grooves. Some say it was used for thrashing grain. Others insist it's a kind of calendar stone, marking solstices and equinoxes with the movement of shadows. Quirky fact: one theory claims it was a dance floor for midsummer festivals, where villagers would dance barefoot until dawn to ensure a bountiful harvest. You sit on the edge of the stone, breathing heavily but content, feeling the night air swirl around you. Above, the stars seem close enough to touch now. Below, the terraces cascade downward like a patchwork quilt sewn into the mountainside. The bells you've been hearing off and on all evening ring again somewhere far away, slow, deep, deliberate, and the faint smell of wood smoke and something sweet rises on the breeze. You stand, stretch your back, and follow the faintest suggestion of a trail that snakes beyond the huts, disappearing into the dark spine of the next ridge. Because of course the path goes on, it always does. You move on from the terraces, following the faint trail that coils like a ribbon along the ridge. Up here the air feels thinner, colder. The moonlight is bright enough to cast hard shadows now, and you can see the silhouettes of distant peaks all around you, sharp and jagged like teeth. After a few minutes, you notice the path steepens again, zigzagging upward toward a rocky outcrop wreathed in low, curling mist. That's when you see it, just barely visible through the haze, the tiny chapel in the mist. It's perched on an impossible ledge, as though someone built it here just to dare gravity to disagree. From a distance, it looks like it might tip right off the mountain at any second, but as you draw closer, you can see the stonework is solid, even if weathered and cracked by centuries of snow and wind. You pause at the base of the ledge and crane your neck. The chapel seems to glow faintly, the mist swirling around it like an old friend. A narrow stairway of rough-hewn stones climbs to its door, each step slightly crooked, each one worn hollow in the middle. You climb slowly, taking care not to slip, feeling the stone cold and slick beneath your boots. At the top, the door stands ajar, its wood blackened with age, carved with a sunburst design so faint you almost miss it. You step inside. The air is warmer here, heavy with the scent of beeswax and damp stone. The chapel is small, no bigger than a single room, but every surface seems alive with color. The walls are covered with faded frescoes depicting saints, animals, and strange scenes you don't recognize. One panel shows a procession of villagers carrying torches into the forest, their faces half hidden under elaborate masks. Another depicts what looks like a woman kneeling before a great tree, her hands outstretched as if pleading. And then there's the central fresco, the one above the altar, of a robed figure standing in a circle of light, holding a book in one hand, and what might be a key or perhaps a dagger in the other. You step closer and realize the figure's face has been scratched away, leaving only a blank oval. Historians still argue whether the defacement was the work of iconoclasts or part of some local rite to erase its power. Either way, the effect is eerie. The figure seems to watch you anyway. On the altar sits a single candle burning low in its holder. Beside it rests a bowl of something dark, berries, and a folded scrap of cloth embroidered with yet another spiral pattern. Someone has been here recently. You glance around and notice that tucked into cracks in the walls are dozens of small offerings, tiny wooden birds, coins, bundles of herbs, even what looks like a child's carved toy goat. According to local custom, visitors leave these behind to ensure safe passage through the mountains. Quirky tidbit. Some say if you take one instead, the chapel's blessings turn into a curse, though no one agrees on what form that curse takes. A faint draft moves through the chapel, carrying with it the low hum of distant bells. You stand still, listening. It almost feels as though the chapel itself is breathing, the mist outside pressing against the windows in slow, steady waves. You take a seat on one of the worn benches along the wall, letting your hands rest on the cool wood, and notice more carvings there, names, dates, symbols scratched deep into the surface by generations of travelers. You run your fingers over them, wondering who they were and whether they ever came back down the mountain. On one bench, you notice a particularly elaborate carving, a series of concentric circles surrounding a tiny star at the center. Beneath it, a name you don't recognize. Historians still debate whether these star circle motifs represent old astronomical knowledge or simply folk art inspired by the night sky. Either way, you can't help but feel the star staring back at you. After a few quiet minutes, you stand and move toward the back of the chapel where a tiny door, barely more than a crawl space, is set into the wall. It's slightly ajar, and beyond it you glimpse a narrow staircase winding downward into darkness. You hesitate, the smell of earth and stone rising to meet you from below. Locals believe the crypt beneath this chapel holds not just bones but secrets, scrolls, perhaps, or relics of an older faith buried when the chapel was first consecrated. No one seems eager to find out. You take a step toward the opening but stop short when you feel a faint vibration in the floor under your feet. Just for an instant, as if something below shifted ever so slightly. You glance back at the altar, where the candle's flame flutters though there's no draft now. You clear your throat quietly out of respect and step back from the crypt door. Not tonight. Instead, you turn to the entrance again and step back outside, into the mist. It's thicker now, curling around your ankles and drifting up the slope like a living thing. The moon is just a faint blur overhead. You descend the crooked stone stairs carefully, glancing back once to see the chapel silhouetted against the fog, its single window faintly glowing, as though lit from within by something older than fire. Once you're back on the trail, you pause and look ahead. The path continues, winding higher still, toward another set of terraces and, just barely visible now, what looks like another cluster of lights perched further along the ridge. The air smells of cold stone and burning pine again. Behind you, the faint toll of a single bell echoes from somewhere in the mist. You adjust your pack, press your palm briefly to one of those waymarkers at the edge of the trail, just in case, and move forward, your steps quiet and deliberate, the chapel's whispers fading behind you. The mist begins to thin as you climb away from the chapel, leaving behind its strange warmth and quiet hum. Ahead, the path narrows to a kind of ridge no wider than a cart, flanked on either side by sheer drops into dark valleys. You keep your eyes on the stones at your feet, careful not to slip, though you catch occasional glimpses of faint golden lights winking far below. Above, the stars have re-emerged from the fog and the moon hangs low now, huge and heavy, throwing long shadows behind you. The air is even colder up here. You can feel it biting your cheeks and creeping down your collar. You rub your hands together, and the sound seems to echo in the stillness. After a few more turns, the ridge flattens out, and you find yourself standing before a strange sight, an ancient wooden bridge spanning a narrow gorge. The bridge looks too delicate to hold your weight, but here it stands, its ropes taut and its planks worn smooth by countless feet. You step closer, testing the first few boards. They creak loudly in protest but hold. The ropes groan slightly as you ease your way out over the gorge. Looking down, you can just make out the glimmer of a stream far below, catching bits of moonlight between the rocks. Halfway across, you pause to take in the view. To your left, the ridge rises toward jagged peaks, their outlines black against the sky. To your right, the gorge widens into a basin dotted with faint terraces and walls. And somewhere in that basin, you see another hamlet, though this one is different. Its lights are few and scattered, its roofs lower and flatter, and it's wrapped in what looks like a protective wall of stones so dark they blend into the mountain. You wonder what kind of people would choose to live there, clinging to the cold belly of the gorge. You cross the rest of the bridge carefully, each step sending a faint vibration through the ropes. On the other side, the path descends quickly into another set of switchbacks, leading you down toward the basin you glimpsed earlier. Here the air grows damp again, heavier, carrying with it the faint scent of wet rock and something metallic, iron, perhaps. You notice the stones underfoot are darker here, streaked with veins of something that glitters faintly even in the moonlight. According to local lore, these rocks are said to hold the mountain's blood, and villagers once chipped away at them to mix the dust into rituals and medicines. Historians still argue whether the red streaks are just iron oxide or evidence of a long-forgotten mining practice. You continue downward until you reach the base of the basin, where the walls of the hamlet rise before you. Up close, the stones look even stranger, rough and uneven, yet fitted together so tightly you can't slip even a blade of grass between them. The wall isn't high, barely taller than you, but it has presence, like a warning more than a barrier. You find a narrow opening and step inside. This village feels older than any of the others, and emptier. The air is thick with silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the eaves and the faint whisper of the wind curling through the alleys. The houses here are squat and dark, their roofs covered in slabs of the same iron-streaked stone you walked on earlier. There are no balconies here, no carved beams or hanging herbs, only shuttered windows and doors closed tight. You walk slowly down the main lane, noticing odd details. A door studded with nails in the shape of a spiral, a chimney shaped like a wolf's head, a well in the center of the square with a broken wooden cover. You stop at the well and peer inside, half expecting to see your own reflection. But the water is black and still, and you can't quite tell how deep it goes. You drop a pebble and wait. It takes longer than you'd expect before you hear the faintest plink echo back up. Around the square, the houses loom in silence, yet you can feel more than see that you're not alone here. Curtains flutter slightly as though disturbed from within. Shadows shift faintly behind shutter slats. You keep walking. On the far side of the square, a narrow lane leads to what appears to be the largest building here. A long hall with thick wooden doors carved with a crescent moon, and a jagged line that might represent a mountain peak or a bolt of lightning. You push the door lightly, and it swings open on silent hinges. Inside, the hall is dim but warmer, lit by a single fire that burns low in a central stone hearth. The walls are hung with heavy tapestries depicting what looks like the history of the hamlet, strange scenes of people building the walls, standing in circles around the well, carrying what might be coffins up the path you just came down. One tapestry shows a figure holding a staff topped with a crescent moon, standing on the bridge you crossed earlier, arms outstretched as though commanding the gorge itself. Another shows a procession of hooded figures walking into a cave, carrying baskets of glowing stones. You move closer to examine the details. One tapestry near the back is smaller but more vivid, It depicts a lone traveler, much like yourself, standing at the village entrance, the walls looming behind them. The figure's face is turned away, but you can just make out what they hold in their hands, a faintly glowing stone. You feel a chill crawl up your spine and glance over your shoulder, but the hall is empty. At the far end of the room stands another altar, this one carved directly from the mountain stone. Atop it sits a shallow basin filled with what looks like iron dust. You reach out and touch it. The dust is cool, gritty, leaving faint reddish streaks on your fingertips. Above the altar is a narrow window cut high into the wall, perfectly aligned with the moon, which now shines directly through it, spilling silver light across the floor. Quirky little note. The locals claim that when the moonlight hits the basin just right, the iron dust hums faintly and reveals hidden symbols. You lean closer and swear, just for an instant, you hear a low vibration beneath your feet. You step back, letting the moonlight slide over the basin undisturbed, and glance one last time at the tapestry of the traveler. The glowing stone seems brighter now, though you know it's just a trick of the light. Outside, the air feels colder, sharper somehow, and you notice the faint scent of pine smoke drifting down from somewhere higher up. Another path winds away from the square, narrower than the one you came in on, but marked by one of those faintly glowing hand-shaped stones pointing the way. You take one last look at the darkened windows and the quiet square, then adjust your pack and follow the path onward into the next mystery waiting above. The narrow path curls out of the basin like a ribbon of shadow, climbing again, always climbing. It feels steeper here than before, and the air grows thinner still, cold enough that your breath drifts out in long, lazy plumes. You rub your hands together and press on, your boots crunching over loose stone and frozen soil. The pine smoke you smelled earlier grows stronger, mingling with a sweetness you can't quite place, like roasted chestnuts, or maybe honey caramelized just to the edge of burning. The path bends sharply, then straightens into a series of shallow steps cut directly into the rock. Each step has been worn down into a hollow by countless feet, some almost polished to a shine. You stop halfway up and turn around. The basin you left behind is now just a pocket of darkness below, its strange walled village nearly invisible. Beyond it, the mountains roll away into layers of shadow and starlight, with the faintest hint of dawn barely brushing the horizon. Ahead, a faint golden glow spills across the stones, and the scent of smoke and sweetness grows stronger. You crest the top of the steps and find yourself in a clearing, a plateau nestled between two towering cliffs, with several wooden cabins clustered around a massive communal hearth. The fire at the center crackles and pops, throwing up sparks that swirl into the night. Around it, benches and stools are scattered, some empty, others holding blankets folded neatly. Above, strings of small lanterns sway gently in the mountain breeze, casting little pools of warm light on the snow-dusted ground. And then you see them, figures moving quietly around the fire. At first you think you're alone, but as your eyes adjust, you notice them, bundled in thick wool coats, faces obscured by scarves or hoods, carrying baskets, stirring pots, tending the flames. No one speaks to you, yet no one seems surprised you're here. You stand quietly and watch as one figure ladles something thick and steaming from a cauldron into a row of small bowls, which are then placed on a low table beside a basket of dark bread. You move closer, drawn by the smell. It's rich, earthy, and faintly spiced. You catch the faintest whiff of cloves, maybe cinnamon. One of the figures glances up and gestures wordlessly toward the table, as if inviting you to eat. You pick up a bowl and feel the heat seep into your hands, grateful for the warmth. The stew is thick and hearty: beans, root vegetables, and some kind of dark meat you can't quite name, tender and flavorful. Quirky fact: locals say the recipe has never been written down, passed only from hand to hand, and that the secret ingredient is moon salt, gathered on certain nights from the rocks near the gorge. As you eat, you notice how the fire seems to burn with more colors than it should, reds and oranges, yes, but also flashes of green and blue, like the aurora has been coaxed down into the hearth. Historians still argue whether this tradition comes from ancient pagan rituals celebrating solstices, or simply from throwing certain minerals into the flames to amuse children. You set your empty bowl down and wander closer to the cabins at the edge of the clearing. Each is small but intricately built, with heavy timber frames and doors painted in deep blues and reds, some bearing symbols you recognize now: spirals, suns, crescent moons. One door stands open just enough for you to peek inside. The interior glows softly with candlelight, and you catch the scent of beeswax and dried herbs. Against one wall, bundles of lavender and sage hang from the rafters, and a collection of small wooden carvings, birds, fish, and little human figures sit lined up on a shelf. You close the door quietly and step back into the night. Near the far edge of the plateau, you spot something unexpected: a long wooden table covered with strange objects. Flat stones carved with intricate patterns, bundles of twigs tied with colored string, and a series of tall, narrow candles burning low. At the center of the table sits a large metal bowl filled with water, and beside it, a single white feather and a piece of black cloth embroidered with gold thread. You lean closer and notice that the water in the bowl reflects not the firelight around you, but the stars above, even though the angle shouldn't allow it. You dip a finger in the water, and it ripples outward in perfect concentric circles. A faint hum seems to rise from the table, or maybe from the cliffs surrounding you, but it stops as soon as you pull your hand away. Another figure approaches the table and lays a sprig of rosemary beside the bowl, before retreating without a word. You step back, letting the quiet of the place wash over you. The faint sound of bells drifts down from somewhere higher up again, though you can't see the source. You return to the fire and stand there for a while, letting the warmth seep into your bones. One of the figures, a woman with a thick scarf wrapped over her head, offers you a piece of bread, still warm, studded with nuts and dried fruit. You accept it with a small nod and she moves on. Around you, the others continue their quiet work, tending the fire, adjusting the lanterns, arranging bundles of herbs on the benches. You notice how they move with the kind of practiced ease that comes from having done this 1,000 times before. The fire flares brighter for a moment, casting long shadows across the clearing, and for just a second you think you see something on the cliffs above, a figure standing on the rocks, watching silently. But when you blink, it's gone. You take a deep breath, savoring the mingled scents of wood smoke, herbs, and that faint sweetness that still lingers in the air. And then you notice another path, narrower, steeper, leading away from the plateau. A faint hand-shaped waymarker glows beside it, pointing upward. You glance once more at the fire, the figures, the strange table with its impossible water bowl. Then you adjust your pack, step lightly past the last of the benches and begin climbing again, following the path that winds higher, deeper, stranger still. The path climbs sharply now, almost cruel in its steepness, twisting through jagged rock and loose scree. You catch yourself leaning forward, hands brushing the cold stones as you pull yourself higher, each breath rising in ghostly white plumes. The faint glow of the fire on the plateau below is already far behind, swallowed by the blackness of the mountain. Here the air tastes sharper, metallic, and you notice that the rocks themselves have changed. They glimmer faintly with flecks of something silvery, catching the moonlight in unexpected places. Some stones even feel warmer to the touch than others, though you chalk it up to your tired imagination. Quirky detail. The locals call these flecks stardust, and swear they only appear on nights when the moon is full and the sky is clear, a gift, they say, from the peaks to those bold enough to climb this high. You glance up. Above you, the faint outline of another structure looms, this one built right into the mountain itself, part stone, part timber, with a roof so steep it seems to merge with the slope behind it. No lights glow in its windows, yet something about it draws you on. As you climb closer, The path levels out briefly and passes under a crude archway made of stacked stones. At its peak hangs another wooden carving, a crescent moon flanked by two stars, their eyes painted open, as if watching your every step. On the far side of the arch, the wind picks up, whistling through narrow gaps in the cliffs. Somewhere in the darkness, you hear the faint clatter of stones falling, though you can't see what might have caused it. When you finally reach the building, you pause to catch your breath, resting your hand against the heavy wooden door. Carved into it are dozens of small spirals radiating outward from a single star at the center, an old motif you've seen before. Historians still argue whether this symbol represents a map, a calendar, or merely a decorative flourish, but locals tend to call it Der Sternenpfad, the star path. You push the door open and step inside. At first, it seems empty. The interior is large and dimly lit by a few narrow windows that let in shafts of moonlight. The walls are lined with shelves filled with curious objects, animal skulls, jars of dried herbs, small bundles of feathers and fur. A long wooden table dominates the center of the room, covered in old parchment maps and brass instruments you vaguely recognize as astrolabes and compasses. In one corner, a pile of books sits in a haphazard stack, their leather covers cracked and faded. You pick one up and thumb through it, page after page of hand-drawn diagrams of constellations, mountain ridges, and strange geometric patterns you don't understand. You set the book down and wander closer to the table. At its center lies a large sheet of parchment pinned under two stones. It shows the mountain range you're climbing now, but with paths and markings you've never seen, a series of dotted lines weaving through the peaks, converging at a single point labeled only with a spiral. You trace the dotted line with your finger and feel a faint vibration in the wood beneath your touch. Or maybe that's just your pulse hammering in your ears. On the wall behind the table hangs a faded tapestry depicting a figure standing atop a mountain, holding a staff that seems to glow. At their feet are smaller figures kneeling, and above them, a sky so full of stars it looks alive. You hear a faint sound then, a soft scraping, and spin around, but see nothing. Yet the air in the room feels charged now, as though someone or something has just left. You glance back at the table and notice a single candle has been lit where before there was none, its flame impossibly steady despite the draft swirling through the room. The candlelight reveals something you hadn't noticed, faint lines etched into the wooden floor, spiraling out from the table in a pattern that mirrors the parchment map. At each point of the spiral sits a small stone, each marked with the same star motif as the door outside. Quirky fact: some villagers believe walking this spiral barefoot at midnight brings clarity of purpose, though others warn it merely ensures you'll dream of the mountain every night for the rest of your life. You crouch and touch one of the stones. It's warm, almost alive under your fingers, but when you look closer, it's just stone, ordinary, unassuming. You stand and glance once more at the tapestry. The figure's face has been worn away, leaving only a blank oval, much like the chapel fresco you saw earlier. The wind outside howls suddenly, rattling the shutters and making the whole building groan softly. You decide to move on. Outside, the path continues upward, narrower now, almost a goat track rather than a road. You follow it around the side of the building and find yourself on a ledge with nothing but sky to your left and an immense black wall of rock to your right. The stars overhead seem brighter now, and the moon hangs low and gold over the next peak. Somewhere above you, faint and distant, you hear bells again, not the deliberate tolling of a church but a quicker, lighter rhythm, almost like laughter turned to sound. You climb higher. The path grows more treacherous here, loose stones shift underfoot, and you occasionally steady yourself with your hands against the cold mountain wall. Finally, the ledge opens onto another plateau, this one small and stark. Here, the ground is bare stone streaked with those silvery veins you've been noticing all night. In the center of the plateau stands a single pillar of rock, tall, narrow, carved with countless tiny stars spiraling up to its peak. You approach slowly, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on you. At the base of the pillar sits a shallow stone bowl, empty save for a thin layer of dust and a few dried petals. You brush the petals aside and see another spiral carved into the basin. Above you, the stars seem to shift, aligning just so, and for a fleeting moment you're sure the spiral in the stone matches the pattern overhead exactly. Historians still argue whether these mountaintop pillars were used for ancient skywatching ceremonies, or whether they simply mark sacred points on the peaks, the so-called veins of the mountain. You stand there for a long moment, listening to the faint wind whistling between the stones, the soft jingling of distant bells, and the quiet beat of your own heart. Then you notice the next path, always another path, beginning again beyond the pillar, steeper and narrower than ever, disappearing into the darkness above. You take one last breath of the cold, sharp air, press your palm lightly to the spiral in the stone, and continue on, higher into the hidden world of the Alps. You press onward, the path narrowing until it's barely wider than your boots. The mountain to your right looms so close you can feel its chill radiating into your shoulder, and to your left, the abyss opens into a star-speckled nothingness. Each step is deliberate now. You place your feet carefully, testing every rock before trusting it. The air up here feels impossibly thin and dry. Even your breath sounds loud in the silence, each exhale curling into the cold. You glance up and notice that the stars seem even brighter, almost too bright, like tiny needles of light pricking the black sky. After what feels like an eternity of careful climbing, the path opens, unexpectedly, into another hidden terrace. But this one is unlike any you've seen before. It's a garden. Or at least, what must have been a garden once. Long, rectangular beds are laid out with stones, some still edged by withered wooden planks. In the moonlight, you can see tufts of stubborn greenery pushing through cracks here and there, pale leaves, silvery moss, clusters of something faintly purple that glows almost imperceptibly. You step lightly between the beds, noting faint carvings in the stones marking each row. Spirals again, yes, but also tiny suns, moons, and what might be stars arranged into constellations. Historians still argue whether this mountaintop garden was a place of cultivation, worship, or even healing, a kind of celestial pharmacy. At the far end of the garden, a circular stone bench wraps around what seems to be a dry fountain. The fountain's basin is filled with small pebbles and petals, some crushed and fragrant underfoot. You sit for a moment, resting your legs, and notice how quiet it is here. Even the wind seems to have stopped to catch its breath. You close your eyes and lean back slightly, letting the cold stone of the bench press into your spine. When you open your eyes again, you notice something shimmering faintly at the center of the garden, a glass orb, no larger than your fist, resting in a small cradle of twisted iron. You stand and walk to it, peering down into its depths. Inside, the orb seems to hold the stars themselves, tiny points of light that shift and dance as you move. Quirky tidbit: the villagers whisper that these orbs are sky seeds, planted long ago by shepherds who wanted the stars to follow them home at night. You reach out but stop yourself short of touching it. There's something about the way it glimmers that makes you think better of disturbing it. Beyond the garden, the path continues. Of course it does, climbing in a series of uneven stairs cut directly into the rock. You adjust your pack and begin ascending again. The stairs lead to yet another terrace, this one much narrower. Here, the stones underfoot seem older somehow, darker, more worn. The walls of the mountain close in on either side, forming a kind of corridor open to the stars above. About halfway down the corridor, you notice a faint flicker of light ahead. As you approach, you see it's coming from a small alcove carved into the rock face. Inside, a single candle burns on a shelf, its flame protected by a glass dome. Around it, a dozen more candles sit, all unlit, arranged in a perfect spiral. Above the candles, someone has scratched words into the stone, though the letters are old and partially worn away. You trace them with your finger and just make out something like, "Those who carry the light must climb alone." You stand quietly for a moment, letting the words settle in your mind. Then you reach down, take one of the unlit candles and tuck it carefully into your coat pocket. The flame in the center flickers as you back away, but doesn't go out. Continuing up, the path begins to twist again, bending sharply around jagged outcroppings. At one point, you have to press yourself flat against the rock wall to navigate a narrow ledge where the mountain drops away entirely on one side. When you emerge from the corridor, you find yourself standing in front of a doorway carved directly into the cliff. It's taller and wider than you'd expect, imposing even, and framed by two massive wooden beams etched with spirals, stars, and symbols you can't decipher. You step through. Inside is a cavern, vast, echoing, and unexpectedly warm. The walls shimmer faintly with veins of quartz that catch the light of dozens of small oil lamps hung in iron sconces. You walk slowly into the cavern, boots crunching over grit and fine sand. To your left and right are shelves carved into the walls, filled with objects you can barely make out: clay jars sealed with wax, tiny cloth-wrapped bundles, stacks of brittle parchment. And ahead, at the far end of the chamber, stands what can only be described as a throne. It's not regal in any traditional sense, just a heavy stone chair raised on a small dais, draped in faded fabrics that once must have been rich reds and golds. Above it, a circular opening in the rock lets moonlight pour directly onto the seat. You walk closer and notice that the fabrics are embroidered with stars and spirals, so intricate they almost seem to shift when you move. At the foot of the throne sits a shallow dish filled with ash, a handful of half-burned herbs scattered on top. On the armrest of the throne, you see a carved handprint, human-sized, though the fingers are unusually long and thin. You place your own hand over it and feel the faint warmth of the stone beneath your palm. Historians still debate whether this throne belonged to an ancient chieftain, a priestess, or someone else entirely. Some even believe it's just a ceremonial marker, never actually used. You stand there for a long moment, feeling the hush of the cavern settle around you. Finally, you step back, leaving the throne bathed in its solitary moonlight, and return to the doorway. Outside, the mountain air feels colder now, sharper, as though the peak itself is testing you. You glance upward and see yet another path, narrower still, winding toward the final ridge. You adjust your pack, reach into your pocket to feel the cool wax of the unlit candle you took from the alcove, and begin to climb again, the throne's faint warmth still lingering on your hand. The climb from here is different, quieter somehow, and heavier. The path becomes so faint at times you're not sure whether it's still a path at all or just wishful thinking carved into the rock by centuries of feet before yours. The stones here seem older, darker, and in some places veined with that strange silver that now glows faintly even without moonlight. You glance back and see how far you've come. Terraces like ghostly scars on the mountain, the flickering lights of villages you've passed barely visible now, and that hidden throne room already swallowed by darkness. Above, the stars seem impossibly close, as if you could just reach up and pluck one down to warm your pocket. You keep moving. Here the mountain no longer slopes gently but rises in jagged steps and sheer faces. You pull yourself up using your hands now, fingers scraping cold stone. The air tastes thin, bitter, and your lungs ache with each breath. Every once in a while, you stop, pressing your back to the rock and listen. That's when you hear it, faint, rhythmic, metallic, like a hammer on an anvil far away. At first you think it's just the mountain creaking and sighing under its own weight, but as you climb closer, it becomes clearer. Someone or something is working up there. Finally, the path opens onto a narrow ridge no wider than a doorway. You steady yourself against the rock and edge forward, and there in the next hollow you see it, the hidden forge. You wouldn't even know it was here if not for the faint orange glow spilling out from a crack in the rock face. You duck under the overhang and find yourself in another cavern, smaller than the throne chamber, but alive with light and sound. Here, an ancient forge still burns, its coals crackling and spitting sparks that drift upward like fiery moths. Against the walls stand crude racks of tools, hammers, tongs, chisels, all blackened with use and lined with frost where the heat doesn't reach. At the center, a flat stone anvil sits atop a wide base, its surface worn smooth. It glows faintly in the firelight, and beside it lies a collection of unfinished metalwork, spiraled medallions, star-shaped amulets, even what looks like a half-formed key as long as your forearm. You reach out to touch the anvil, and it's warmer than you expect, not hot, just a steady warmth that seems to hum faintly under your hand. Quirky tidbit. Old stories claim that these hidden mountain forges were manned not by villagers but by spirits of the peaks, who shaped tools and charms for the bravest climbers who dared to ask. You notice above the forge a mural etched directly into the stone, a series of panels depicting the forging of a massive chain that stretches from one mountaintop to another, and a figure standing at its midpoint holding a hammer aloft. Scholars still argue whether these chains are meant to symbolize unity between the peaks or to represent literal bridges the ancients once built to traverse the mountains. You step closer to inspect one of the finished medallions hanging on the wall. Its spiral design gleams despite the dust, and when you pick it up, it feels heavier than it should, cool and solid in your hand. You turn it over and see tiny letters scratched into the back, so faint they're nearly illegible. You hang it back where you found it, letting it settle among its silent siblings. Beyond the forge, you notice another tunnel darker, narrower, with no light to guide you. The faint hammering sound has stopped now, replaced by something else, the low murmur of moving air, like a distant storm trapped within the rock. You take a deep breath and step away from the warmth of the forge into the tunnel. The air grows colder almost immediately. Your breath clouds and swirls in the faint moonlight that manages to find its way through cracks overhead. The stone walls here are rougher, more jagged, as though they've been left unfinished, and they glisten with moisture. You pass niches cut into the walls, each holding a small stone figure, some human, some animal, some so abstract you can't even guess what they're meant to be. Their blank eyes seem to follow you as you walk. One figure catches your attention, a human form with a bird's head and wings folded against its back, perched on a small pedestal. At its feet lies another spiral carved into the floor, and you pause there, pressing your hand lightly to the stone. It feels warmer than the surrounding rock, faintly vibrating, though you hear nothing now except your own breathing. When you finally emerge from the tunnel, the mountain has changed again. You stand on a ridge that juts out into nothing, a ledge with no guardrail, no comforting wall to lean against. Below you lies a vast expanse of shadow and starlight, and above you, nothing but open sky. The ridge widens slightly where you stand, forming a kind of natural platform. At its center lies an arrangement of stones, flat, oval, and polished, set into the ground in the shape of yet another spiral. This one is different, though. Where the others felt decorative, this one feels deliberate, almost ceremonial. You step into the spiral, following its curves slowly toward the center. With each step, the faint murmuring you heard earlier grows louder, until you realize it's not a storm at all but a low, thrumming hum like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. When you reach the center, you stand still, letting the sound wash over you. You glance up at the sky, and for a moment, just a moment, you swear you see the stars above shift slightly, as though acknowledging you. Quirky little note. Local stories claim that standing here at the right time, under the right stars, opens a door to another place entirely. Historians still debate whether this is purely folklore or evidence of some ancient rite of passage. You take a deep breath and let the sound of the mountain sink into you. Then you step back, retracing the spiral's path until you're back at the edge of the ridge. Ahead, yet another path reveals itself, faint as moonlight, climbing higher still. You adjust your pack, glance once more at the forge's glow now far below, and begin your next ascent, your feet finding their rhythm again against the mountain's ancient skin. The path here feels almost ethereal, as though you're walking not on stone, but on some delicate thread strung between stars. It's narrow, laughably so, and every now and then you press yourself into the cold mountain wall just to let the fear ebb from your knees. Beneath you, the black void stretches forever, and above you, the peaks finally start to feel within reach. The wind has picked up now, carrying little knives of ice that nip at your cheeks and ears. Yet it also brings something else, a scent faint but sweet, like crushed alpine flowers underfoot. You wouldn't expect blooms to survive at this height, but when you glance down, you notice tiny star-shaped blossoms clinging stubbornly between the cracks in the rock. Quirky bit of lore. Some villagers believe these flowers are actually spirits of climbers who never returned, choosing to bloom quietly here rather than descend. You continue upward, your boots scraping against the stones, and eventually the path flattens again, into a strange sort of balcony carved into the mountainside. Here, someone long ago, no doubt, has built a series of delicate wooden arches that stretch outward over the void, like ribs of some forgotten creature. Tied to these arches are hundreds of thin strands of cloth, all fluttering in the wind. You step closer, and the air fills with the soft sound of them snapping and rustling like whispers. Blues, whites, faded reds, each strip of cloth has been inscribed with something. Names, prayers, symbols. The mountain here is said to be the final stop for those who carried heavy burdens in life. You're supposed to tie your worries to the wind and let them go. Historians still argue whether this tradition predates Christianity or arose as a kind of folk pilgrimage in response to the harsh isolation of these peaks. You run your fingers over the edges of a few ribbons. One bears a neat line of script that reads simply, "Forgive me." Another, "Come back safe." And yet another, frayed, barely clinging to its knot, just says, "Home." You dig into your coat pocket and pull out the stub of a pencil you picked up way back in the first village, and you find a scrap of paper hidden in your pack. Without really thinking, you scribble something, maybe not even words, just a shape, a spiral, and tie it to the nearest ribbon. The wind immediately snatches it and makes it dance among the others. You stand there a while, letting the wind take what it wants. The stars above you so close now you feel you could touch them if you dared. Beyond the balcony, you see the faint trace of yet another path, always another path, that cuts behind the arches and begins to snake upward once more. You follow. The climb now takes you into a narrow gully flanked by walls of jagged black rock streaked with that familiar silver dust. The silence here is heavy, broken only by the distant sound of falling stones. And then you hear something else, faint, melodic, like a chime. You round a corner and stop. Before you is a cavern entrance, marked by two enormous standing stones leaning inward like bookends. Between them hangs a curtain of delicate metal discs, bronze, copper, even a few flecked with gold, strung together and clinking gently in the breeze. As you pass through, each disc catches the moonlight, throwing little spots of brightness on the cavern walls and on you. Inside, the cavern opens wide again, and for the first time, you notice a warmth that feels almost comforting. The floor is smooth, polished by centuries of feet, and faintly glows with that same silvery shimmer. At the center of the cavern lies what can only be called a pool, though it looks nothing like water. It's black, so black it seems to swallow all the light, but its surface ripples like liquid, and when you kneel and look closer, you realize it's reflecting the stars above perfectly, even though you're standing inside solid rock. One of the more eccentric stories you remember hearing claims this pool isn't water at all, but a kind of sky mirror. A fragment of the firmament fallen here long ago, now resting quietly inside the mountain. You reach out and let your fingers skim the surface. It's cold, shockingly cold, and when you pull your hand back, a faint outline of your touch lingers on the ripples before fading away. On the far side of the pool sits a stone plinth, small and unassuming. Atop it rests a bowl of flowers, the same star-shaped blossoms you saw clinging to the rocks outside, fresh, as though someone replaced them just hours ago. You sit there for a while, letting the quiet press in, listening to the faint clink of the discs at the entrance and the almost inaudible hum that seems to rise from the pool. Historians still argue whether this cavern was ever used as a temple, a resting place, or simply a way station for the lost. But standing here now, you can't help but feel you've stumbled into the mountain's private heart. You rise, legs stiff from crouching, and take one last look at the mirrored pool before stepping back through the curtain of metal discs, each chiming faintly as you pass. Outside again, the air feels sharper but clearer somehow. You glance up, and there it is, the final path, cutting into the very peak itself, a dark line against the faintest blush of dawn now beginning to creep over the horizon. It seems impossible that you're still climbing, but here you are, adjusting your pack, fingers brushing the little ribbon you left behind as though to remind yourself. You've already given your worries to the wind. You place one foot on the next stone step, then another, and once more you climb. The stones of this final path are colder, sharper somehow, as though the mountain is making sure you truly mean to continue. You move slowly, carefully, each footstep echoing faintly in the thin air. The sky above has begun to lighten ever so slightly, just enough to paint the peaks around you in shades of steel and pearl. Here, the trail is less a path and more a suggestion, faint scratches and depressions in the rock, lined here and there with little piles of stones stacked by previous travelers. You pause at one such cairn, running your fingers over its cold surface, and notice a tiny spiral carved into the flat top stone, as if to remind you, you are still on the right way. It's quiet now. Even the wind seems hesitant to come this high. You can hear your own heartbeat in your ears, and the faint crunch of grit underfoot feels indecently loud. After what feels like hours, though it's hard to tell anymore, you reach a kind of gateway. Two tall, thin spires of black stone rising out of the ridge like jagged teeth. Between them stretches a narrow slab, just wide enough to walk across, with the sky yawning open on either side. You hesitate there for a moment, resting a hand on the left spire for balance. Its surface is smooth, worn down by countless hands before yours. You wonder briefly how many others have stood here, gathering their courage before crossing this final bridge. The slab flexes slightly under your weight as you step onto it, and you have to fight the urge to drop to all fours and crawl. But you keep moving, eyes fixed on the opposite side. When you finally step off the bridge, the mountain seems to open up before you. You find yourself on a broad ledge with nothing but sky and the faint glow of dawn ahead. The horizon is painted now with streaks of rose and gold, and for the first time all night, you can see the true height you've reached, the valleys below nothing more than shadows, the ridges around you sharp and silent. But what truly catches your eye is what sits at the center of the ledge, a great stone circle. It's made of massive slabs, each taller than you, arranged in a perfect ring. Some lean slightly, some are cracked, but the circle remains whole, its presence undeniable. You step closer and see that each stone bears carvings, spirals again, yes, but also stars, moons, and scenes of figures standing atop mountains, their arms raised to the sky. One stone in particular stands apart just inside the circle. It's shorter, squatter, with a flat top and a shallow bowl carved into its surface. The bowl holds a few small objects, a cluster of dried herbs, a polished stone, a strip of cloth, and what looks like a single silver coin. You reach out and let your fingers hover over the bowl. The air here seems charged, almost humming. Quirky detail. The people in the villages below claim the circle is a place where wishes spoken aloud have a better chance of finding their way to the stars, though they always add, half joking, that the stars sometimes say no. You stand quietly and feel the faint warmth of the rising sun beginning to touch your back. As you walk slowly around the circle, you notice that the stones cast long, thin shadows across the ground, all converging toward the center of the ring. The ground there is worn smooth by countless feet, and faint lines radiate outward like the spokes of a wheel. Historians still argue whether this stone circle was a calendar, a ceremonial site, or even a kind of map of the surrounding peaks. But standing here, you can almost feel how it might have been all three at once. You sit for a while at the edge of the circle, legs dangling over the ledge. Below, the world stretches away in every direction, layer upon layer of valleys, cliffs, and snow-dusted ridges, all fading into the dawn. Eventually, you pull the unlit candle from your pocket, the one you took from the alcove near the forge, and set it gently in the bowl at the center of the circle. You don't light it. Somehow, it feels better to leave it that way, waiting. You run your hands lightly over the stone beside you and notice that even here, someone has carved a spiral, small and faint, almost hidden. You smile at that and whisper something, maybe a wish, maybe just a thank you, and let the mountain carry your words away. You stand and stretch, feeling the ache in your legs and the sting of cold air in your lungs. The sun is higher now, spilling golden light across the stones, making the silver veins in the rock sparkle like frost. When you turn to leave, you notice another path beginning where the ledge meets the mountain wall, narrow, steep, and climbing higher still. Because of course, there's always another path. You glance once more at the stone circle, now glowing warmly in the morning light, and then step onto the next trail, boots crunching softly against the frost. You climb. Higher, always higher. By now, the mountain feels alive beneath you, thrumming faintly underfoot with each step, as though the great stone beast is aware of your presence and watching. The light of dawn sharpens as you climb, painting the jagged rocks in shades of gold and blue. The path has almost dissolved entirely at this point, nothing more than a faint suggestion along a knife-edge ridge. You move slowly, one foot carefully in front of the other, fingers grazing the mountain wall when you can, your breath steaming steadily in the icy air. It's so quiet now that you can hear the soft rasp of your boots on the stone, the faint whisper of wind tugging at the hood of your coat, and somewhere very far below, the muted roar of an avalanche or perhaps a river you'll never see. The ridge eventually narrows into a seam between two vertical walls, forming what looks like a natural hallway of rock. You squeeze through, the stone cool and damp on your shoulders, and emerge into another hidden terrace, this one so high that clouds drift lazily below you like fields of cotton. Here stands what looks like the ruin of a chapel. It's small, hardly bigger than a single room, and built right into the mountainside. Its walls are still standing, though cracked, and the roof has long since collapsed, leaving only a few blackened beams that jut skyward like broken ribs. You approach the doorway, which bears no door, only a low archway cut into the rock and a faded symbol carved at its peak, a sun surrounded by concentric circles. Inside, the floor is covered in shards of stone and fallen wood. A faint smell of dust and cold ash lingers in the air. At the far end of the chapel, a narrow altar still stands, its surface etched with spirals and crescent moons. A few dried flowers rest there, along with what appears to be a handful of smooth, flat stones stacked in a neat little tower. You run your fingers over the altar. It's warm. Quirky fact: locals say this chapel was once a waypoint for traveling monks, but they also whisper that it predates any written records. Older than any church, older than the villages themselves, perhaps older even than memory. You stand for a while under the empty sky pouring in from above, imagining what it must have been like when candles flickered in these corners and prayers rose like smoke to the heavens. Historians still argue whether this was truly a Christian chapel at all, or whether the symbols here belong to something far more ancient, later baptized, to keep the story simple for those who arrived after. You kneel and add one of the small pebbles from your pocket to the little stack on the altar. It teeters for a moment, then settles as though it belongs. You leave the chapel quietly, stepping back into the bright morning air. Ahead, the path grows steeper once more. The clouds below begin to thin and scatter, revealing glimpses of the valleys you left behind, tiny now, almost laughably small. The climb becomes more difficult here. You find yourself scrambling over boulders, gripping cracks in the rock to haul yourself higher. Your breath comes in sharp bursts that freeze the moment they leave your mouth. At one point you pause and look back. The ruined chapel is already distant, framed by the sky, its solitary altar glowing faintly in the sun. You push on. Finally, the ridge flattens slightly, and you find yourself standing at what seems to be the very tip of the world. It's not quite a summit, not yet, but here the mountain offers a kind of balcony, jutting out into the sky. And there at its edge stands a solitary figure. You freeze. They are cloaked, hood drawn low, hands resting lightly on a long staff that gleams faintly with that same silver you've seen streak through the stones. They stand perfectly still, gazing out over the clouds, their back to you. You hesitate, wondering if you should speak, but before you can, they lift a hand and point upward toward the final peak. Then, without turning, they step off the ledge. Your breath catches. You rush to the edge, but there is nothing below, just the empty air and the endless clouds. You stand there for a long moment, letting the silence settle again before glancing upward. And there it is, the true summit. It seems impossibly close now, the last stretch of jagged stone catching the light like polished glass. The path to it winds narrowly, almost vertical in places, marked here and there with faint white scratches and tiny cairns no bigger than your hand. You take one final look at the ledge where the figure stood, nothing left now but the faint outline of their boots in the frost, then adjust your pack and step onto the last climb. The air is so thin now that each breath feels like dragging needles into your lungs. Your legs burn, your fingers ache, and still you climb. One foot, then the next. Higher, always higher. The wind picks up, but this time it feels different, less like an adversary, more like a guide, tugging at your shoulders and whispering encouragement in a language you almost understand. Your hands brush the familiar spirals carved into the stones as you pass, tracing their curves without thinking, as though they've always been part of you. The clouds thin further. The sky deepens to a rich, impossible blue. And then, just as you think your legs can't carry you another step, you reach the final ledge. Here, at last, you stand at the edge of the summit itself, the whole world spread out below like a vast, silent map. You set your pack down, straighten your spine, and let the sun pour over you as the mountain breathes quietly beneath your feet. And ahead, one final set of steps carved into the very peak rises toward what awaits at the summit. The final steps are the most daunting of all, not because they are steep or treacherous, but because they seem so deliberate. Each one cut cleanly into the stone, each one just high enough to make you feel the weight of your own body as you climb. They lead straight into the blazing sky now, with nothing left to obscure the view but your own breath. You pause at the base of the stairs, resting a hand on the first riser. The sun is fully awake now, casting its golden light across the jagged ridges below, making the silver veins in the rock shimmer and dance. It almost feels like the mountain itself is glowing, alive and watchful. With a quiet exhale, you take the first step. And then the next. And the next. There is no railing, no wall, Nothing but air to either side of you, just the mountain skin underfoot and the endless sky above. At one point you glance back and catch your breath. Below you lies everything. The villages hidden in their valleys, the terraces and arches you passed, the chapel, the forge, the spiral garden, even the mirrored pool, all faint and ghostly now, as if you dreamed them. You keep going. The wind here has changed too. It doesn't bite anymore. It's softer now, cooler than warm but kind, carrying faint whispers you can almost but not quite decipher. At the top of the stairs, the stone flattens into a wide platform. You step onto it, and for a moment you can't move, you're overwhelmed by the sight before you. Here, at the very crown of the mountain, lies a great flat disk of stone. Its surface is covered in carvings so intricate they seem to shimmer and shift as the light plays over them. Spirals upon spirals, stars nestled within stars, arcs and lines that intersect in ways you can't quite follow. At the center of the disk is a raised stone pedestal, and on it sits a single object, a small, unassuming spiral of silver, no bigger than your palm. You approach slowly, hearing the crunch of frost under your boots, feeling your heart hammering against your ribs. The air here hums faintly, a vibration that you feel more than hear, and the pedestal radiates a subtle warmth that cuts through the morning chill. You reach out and gently pick up the spiral. It's heavier than it looks, and when your fingers close around it, the carvings on the disc beneath your feet seem to brighten, just slightly, as though acknowledging you. You turn it over in your hand and notice tiny symbols etched along its edge, the same crescent moons, stars, and tiny footprints you've seen all along the way. Quirky tidbit. Down in the villages, they call this place Der Gipfelpfad, the summit path, and claim that whoever climbs it and touches the final spiral carries the mountain's memory forever, both a gift and a burden. You stand there for a long while, letting the quiet wrap around you. Historians still argue whether this summit platform was ever used for coronations, rituals, or simply as a marker of human persistence, the final punctuation mark at the top of the world. But standing here now, you stop caring what they think. You close your eyes, feeling the warmth of the silver spiral in your palm, the sun on your face, the mountain under your feet. For the first time in what feels like forever, you let yourself simply be. And when you open your eyes, the horizon stretches endlessly before you, peaks and valleys and clouds, all bathed in the golden light of a new day. You tuck the spiral into your coat pocket, take one last deep breath of that sharp, thin air, and smile faintly to yourself. Because there will always be another path, but for now, just for now, you've reached the top. And now, you let yourself linger here a little longer. The sun's warmth spills slowly over the stones, softening the edges of everything you see. The wind quiets to a gentle sigh, rustling faintly at your back, and the mountains below melt into a blur of soft blues and grays. You sit down on the smooth rock of the summit, your legs folding beneath you, the weight of your journey slipping away with each breath. The silver spiral rests in your pocket, faintly warm against your chest, but it feels lighter now, as though the mountain is keeping its heavier secrets for another time. You close your eyes, and the hum of the stone beneath you steadies into a slow, soothing rhythm, as though the peaks themselves are breathing, calm and unhurried, their ancient patience settling over you like a blanket. The air here is different somehow, not quite cold, not quite warm, but full of quiet promise. Even the stars, though faded now by the morning light, seem to linger a little longer just for you, glinting faintly above the ridges. And as you exhale, you let the memory of every step, the arches, the pools, the gardens, the whispers of forgotten chapels, drift away like ribbons on the wind. For now, there is nothing to climb, nothing to prove, only the soft hush of the hidden villages far below, and the quiet heartbeat of the mountain cradling you where you sit. So stay here, breathe, and let sleep come easily, as though the stars themselves are tucking you in. Sweet dreams.